was a warm, sunny afternoon when Danielle Carter decided to visit her hotel, the famous Carter Grand Hotel. The hotel was one of the most popular luxury spots in the city, known for its golden lights, marble floors, and five-star service. It stood tall in the center of downtown, a symbol of success and elegance. But what made it even more special was the woman behind it, Danielle herself. Danielle was not just any businesswoman. She was a self-made CEO who had built her empire from scratch. Coming from a small town with big dreams, she had faced countless challenges to reach where she was today. Many people didn't believe a young black woman could own such a grand hotel, but Danielle had proved them wrong, with hard work, determination, and intelligence. She had been traveling for several months, opening new branches and meeting investors. Now that things were running smoothly, she wanted to return home. Quietly, without announcement. Danielle didn't tell anyone she was coming. She wanted to see how her staff behaved when they didn't know the owner was watching. In her mind, this was the best way to test the true quality of her business. That morning, she chose a simple outfit, jeans, a white shirt, and sneakers. She tied her hair up neatly and wore sunglasses. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like any regular guest. And that was exactly what she wanted. When Danielle arrived at the hotel, she paused for a moment in front of the main entrance. The shining glass doors reflected her face, and for a second, she smiled proudly. This building had once been a dream on paper. Now it was real, tall, beautiful, and alive. People were walking in and out. Bellboys were pushing luggage carts, and the fountain outside sparkled under the sunlight. It felt good to be home. But what happened next would change everything. Danielle stepped inside the lobby. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Guests were relaxing on couches, sipping coffee and chatting softly. Behind the counter, the front desk staff were busy typing and answering calls. Danielle walked up to the desk and waited politely. No one noticed her at first. She cleared her throat and smiled. "Excuse me," she said gently. The receptionist, a young woman in a neat uniform, didn't look up immediately. When she finally did, her expression wasn't friendly. She scanned Danielle from head to toe, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Yes? Can I help you?" she asked in a flat tone. Danielle kept her smile. "Hi, I just wanted to check something about my room," she said. The receptionist sighed. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Danielle replied. "I believe it's under the name Carter." The receptionist frowned. "Carter? I don't see that here. Are you sure this is the right hotel?" Danielle's smile faded a little. "Yes, I'm sure. Before she could finish, another employee walked by and whispered something to the receptionist. Both of them looked at Danielle again, this time with suspicion. The receptionist crossed her arms. "Ma'am, this is a private property. We don't allow people to just walk in and wander around. If you're not a guest, you'll have to leave." Danielle blinked, surprised. "Excuse me? I'm not wandering around, But before she could explain, the woman gestured toward the security desk. "Security, can you please assist this lady?" Two large security guards approached. They stood on either side of Danielle, towering over her. Guests nearby began to stare. A few even took out their phones. Danielle's heart began to pound. She raised her hand calmly. "Listen, this must be a misunderstanding. My name is Danielle Carter. I own this hotel." One of the guards chuckled softly. "Right, ma'am. And I'm the mayor," he said sarcastically. The other guard shook his head. "Let's go, ma'am. You can't stay here." Danielle's throat felt tight. She looked around, hoping someone would recognize her, but no one did. The staff, the receptionist, even the manager standing in the corner, they all just stared. No one believed her. As the guards gently but firmly took her by the arms, Danielle felt a deep mix of anger and sadness. This was her hotel, her dream, her pride, her hard work. And now she was being thrown out like a stranger. Outside, the hot sun hit her face, but she hardly noticed it. She stood by the fountain, taking slow breaths, trying to calm down. Guests passing by looked at her curiously. Some whispered. Others just kept walking. In that moment, Danielle realized something very important. Respect doesn't always come with titles or money. Sometimes people only see what's on the surface. They judge by clothes, by color, by assumption, and, as she stood there, she made a quiet promise to herself. This would not end here. The people who embarrassed her, the ones who disrespected her, they were about to learn exactly who she was. Danielle pulled out her phone and made one short call. Her voice was calm but firm. "Get the general manager here, right now," she said. She hung up and waited. Within minutes, everything would change, and not just for her, but for everyone inside that hotel. As Danielle stood outside the hotel, the sound of the fountain faded into the background. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was stunned. For a moment, she simply watched the busy street, feeling the sting of disbelief settle in her chest. A few people glanced at her curiously, wondering why a well-dressed woman had been thrown out of a luxury hotel. But Danielle didn't care about their stares. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant calling back. "Ms. Carter, what happened? You sound upset." Danielle took a deep breath. "I just got thrown out of my own hotel, Clara," she said slowly, as if even she couldn't believe it. There was silence on the other end. "Wait, what? Thrown out? How?" "Apparently my staff doesn't recognize me anymore," Danielle replied, her tone calm but cold. "Send a message to the general manager. Tell him I'm outside, right now." She ended the call and folded her arms, her mind racing. She could have walked away and handled it later. But this wasn't just about her pride, it was about something deeper. It was about how her staff treated people when no one important was watching. 2 minutes later, the glass doors swung open. The hotel's general manager, Mr. Lewis, came rushing out, his face pale and nervous. Behind him were a few senior employees whispering frantically, "Ms. Carter." "Oh my God. Ms. Carter, I had no idea you were coming," he said breathlessly, running up to her. Danielle turned her eyes toward him. Sharp, steady, and silent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet disappointment in her face said everything. "I was here for 10 minutes, Lewis," she said slowly. 10 minutes. I spoke to your front desk staff. They called security on me. Your guards threw me out in front of your guests, and not one person asked for my name before doing it. Lewis swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. They didn't know. They didn't know because they didn't care," Danielle interrupted. Her tone was firm but calm, like a storm building in silence. "If I had been a guest, do you think this would have been acceptable? If this was someone else, someone without money, someone not dressed expensively, would they have been treated with any kindness?" The people behind Lewis looked down at their shoes. None of them dared to speak. "I don't run a hotel that treats people like that," Danielle said. "This building carries my name, and that means respect. For everyone." Just then, the 2 security guards who had escorted her out came walking toward them. They were laughing quietly, unaware of what was happening. When they saw Lewis standing beside Danielle, they froze mid-step. The manager turned to them sharply. "Do you know who this is?" he asked. The taller guard frowned. No, sir. She said she owned the place, but..." Lewis cut him off. "This is the owner. This is Ms. Danielle Carter, the CEO of Carter Grand Hotels." The guard's face went pale. The other one blinked in horror. "Oh my God, ma'am, we didn't know, we thought..." Danielle looked at them both. "You thought what, that I didn't belong here?" They couldn't answer. Their silence filled the air heavier than any apology could. Danielle looked around. Guests were watching through the glass doors. Some were even filming. The receptionist, who had insulted her earlier, now stood frozen behind the counter, her hands shaking. Danielle turned back to Lewis. "Call every single one of them out here. The receptionist, the assistant, both of these guards, all of them. Now." Within moments, the entire front desk staff was standing outside. The receptionist looked close to tears. No one said a word. Danielle looked at each face, and not with anger, but with disappointment. "You see," she began, her voice steady. "A hotel is more than a building. It's an experience. It's how people are made to feel. And in my hotel, no one, no matter their race, clothes, or status, should ever be made to feel small. Tears rolled down the receptionist's cheeks. The guards looked down in shame. Danielle continued. Today you all embarrassed me. But worse than that, you embarrassed this company. You showed the world what disrespect looks like. And I can't allow that to continue. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then with quiet authority, she said, You're all dismissed, effective immediately. A soft gasp ran through the group. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but Danielle raised her hand. No, Louis, don't try to explain. You should have trained them better. This failure is on leadership, and it starts from the top. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was powerful. The kind of tone that made people listen, made them think. The staff stood there in silence, realizing that this moment, this 2-minute confrontation, had cost them their jobs. And Danielle didn't say another word. She turned around and walked back into her hotel, her head held high. As she stepped through the glass doors, guests who had witnessed the entire scene moved aside respectfully. Some even nodded quietly. Danielle didn't seek attention. She didn't need applause. What she wanted was change, real change in how her people treated others. Inside, she took a deep breath. The lobby that once made her proud now felt different, colder, quieter. But that was about to change. Danielle wasn't just going to rebuild her team. She was going to rebuild her values. And for the first time that day, she smiled. Because this was the moment she realized, sometimes you have to be thrown out of your own empire to remind people who truly built it. The moment Danielle walked back into the hotel, a heavy silence followed her. Every step she took echoed through the marble floors. Guests who had witnessed the drama whispered quietly, holding their phones still recording. The very woman who had just been thrown out was now walking like a queen returning to her throne. But inside, Danielle wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about respect. About how quickly people judge, how easily they assume, and how cold a person's heart can become when they forget the value of kindness. As she crossed the lobby, the same receptionist who had insulted her earlier stood trembling behind the counter. Danielle's calm expression made her even more nervous. The manager, Mr. Lewis, followed a few steps behind, sweating as if every breath might be his last as an employee. Turn off those cameras, Danielle said softly, glancing at the guests. Her voice wasn't angry, but it carried power. Within seconds, everyone lowered their phones. The staff froze in place, afraid to move or speak. Danielle stood still for a moment, looking around her hotel. The chandeliers, the golden curtains, the artwork she had personally chosen. Everything was beautiful on the outside, but now she saw something ugly beneath it. The lack of compassion, the lack of soul. This hotel, she said quietly, her voice breaking the silence, was built to be a place of warmth and dignity. Not arrogance, her words hit like thunder in a calm sky. Even the air seemed to grow heavy. The receptionist, tears now glistening in her eyes, whispered, Ms. Carter, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Danielle raised her hand gently. That's the point, she said. You didn't know, but you also didn't care to find out. The woman's lips trembled. She looked down, unable to meet Danielle's eyes. One of the guests, an older woman who had seen everything, stepped forward hesitantly. Miss, I saw what they did to you. It wasn't right. Nobody deserves that. Danielle turned and smiled politely. Thank you, ma'am, she said. But this isn't just about me. This is about how we treat people when we think they're nobody. Those words sent a ripple of emotion through the crowd. Even some guests nodded, quietly agreeing. The security guards who had escorted her out earlier now stood near the elevator, their posture stiff, faces pale. They looked like soldiers waiting for judgment. Danielle approached them slowly. When I told you I was the owner, she said softly, why did you laugh? The taller guard stammered. Ma'am, we thought, you didn't look like... He stopped mid-sentence, realizing his words would only make it worse. Danielle finished it for him. Didn't look like a CEO? He swallowed hard and nodded. She sighed. That's exactly the problem. You see a woman like me, dressed simple without bodyguards, and you assume she's lying. You assume she doesn't belong here. That kind of thinking destroys good people and good businesses. The guard's eyes welled up. I'm sorry, ma'am. I really am. Danielle didn't answer right away. She looked at him, not with hate, but with something deeper. disappointment. Sorry doesn't fix what people saw today. There were guests in this lobby who watched you drag me out like I was nothing. They filmed it. They posted it. Do you know what happens next? The guard shook his head. Danielle turned toward Mr. Lewis. By tomorrow morning, she said, this video will be all over social media. And people won't just see employees making a mistake. They'll see a hotel that humiliates its own owner. They'll see a business that fails to respect others. Lewis looked like he might faint. Miss Carter, please, we can manage this. I'll make a statement, Danielle interrupted him, her tone cold but calm. No, you won't. I'll handle it myself. Because I don't cover up problems, I fix them. Her words drew quiet gasps. Even the guests standing nearby were completely silent, drawn in by her strength. Danielle looked at the staff one last time. All of you standing here, remember this moment. Remember how quickly a smile can turn to shame when pride takes over. You thought you were protecting this place, but the truth is you were destroying its spirit. And with that, she turned to leave. As she walked toward the elevators, whispers filled the room again. One guest whispered to another, "That's the owner. She handled that like a true leader." Another said softly, "I'd stay here again just because of her." Danielle heard them, but she didn't turn around. Her heart was heavy, but her purpose was clear. She wasn't just going to fire people. She was going to rebuild something bigger, a new culture. Upstairs in her private office, she sat down at her desk. For the first time in a long while, she felt both broken and proud. Broken because of the pain, proud because she had handled it with grace. She looked out the window at the city below, the skyline glowing under the sunset. A thought crossed her mind. They may have thrown me out of my own hotel, but they will never throw me out of my own story. Her phone buzzed again, this time with notifications. The video had already hit social media. Views were climbing by the second. Comments poured in, some outraged, some inspired. Danielle smiled faintly. Let them talk, she whispered to herself. The truth will speak louder than any rumor. That night the world would learn who Danielle Carter really was. Not just a businesswoman, not just a CEO, but a woman who could walk through humiliation and still rise higher than ever before. Danielle didn't sleep that night. She sat by her hotel office window, watching the city lights flicker like restless thoughts. Her phone buzzed every few seconds. News outlets calling, emails flooding in, social media exploding. The video of her being thrown out of her own hotel was everywhere. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Unbelievable. Queen energy. She handled it like a boss. Danielle scrolled through the messages, her heart heavy yet strangely calm. The world now knew what happened. What started as humiliation had turned into a global conversation about race, respect, and leadership. But for Danielle, it wasn't about fame. It was about truth. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not a public statement, not an apology, but a plan. She listed everything that had gone wrong. Poor staff training, weak management, lack of empathy. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. She would rebuild everything, even if she had to start from zero. The next morning, the hotel was buzzing. Cameras, reporters, guests. Everyone wanted to see the woman who had fired her entire front desk team in 2 minutes. The story had gone viral overnight, and now every major network wanted an interview. Danielle didn't respond to any of them. She didn't need to. Her actions would speak louder than words. At exactly 9 a.m., she stepped out of her office wearing a sleek black suit. Her posture was straight, her expression calm. The staff who remained, the senior managers and department heads, were waiting nervously in the lobby. They all knew something big was about to happen. As she approached, the whispering stopped. The only sound was the soft click of her heels on the marble floor. "Good morning," she said evenly. "I trust you've all seen the video by now." No one answered. Some nodded slightly, afraid to speak. Danielle looked around. "What you saw in that video is not just a mistake," she continued. "It's a reflection of everything wrong with how we've been running this place. The guest or anyone does should never feel like they don't belong. Not here. Not under my name." The general manager, Mr. Lewis, looked pale and exhausted. "Ms. Carter," he began, "I can assure you I've already started damage control. We've issued internal memos. Danielle stopped him with a glance. "Damage control?" she repeated quietly. "Mr. Lewis, this isn't about image. It's about integrity." She took a deep breath and turned to face everyone. Let me tell you what really happened yesterday. Not from a headline, but from me. Everyone listened closely. I walked in dressed simply, without security, without my usual assistant. I wanted to see how the hotel was running when I wasn't around. I didn't want red carpets or special treatment. I just wanted honesty. She paused. Instead, I was judged by how I looked, by what I wore, by the color of my skin. And instead of being greeted with respect, I was escorted out like a criminal. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes, calm and sharp, carried the weight of disappointment that hit deeper than any anger could. I could have fired one or two people quietly and moved on, Danielle continued. But that wouldn't fix the real issue. The issue isn't just a few rude employees. It's a culture that allowed it to happen. The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was right. Danielle walked toward the front desk where a new temporary team was standing nervously. This counter, she said, resting her hand on it, is where first impressions are made. Yesterday it became a place of humiliation. That ends today. Then she looked up at Lewis. Effective immediately, you're suspended until further notice. I'll be reviewing your leadership record personally. Lewis's eyes widened. Ma'am, please, this isn't punishment, Danielle interrupted softly. It's accountability. You're not the enemy. You're part of the problem we're going to fix. He nodded slowly, realizing there was no argument left to make. Danielle then turned to the rest of the senior staff. I want every department head to submit a full report on how their team handles guest interactions. Every single detail. By tonight, she straightened her jacket. And from this day forward, I will personally train every new hire that joins this hotel. No one will represent the Carter name without understanding what it stands for. Respect, equality, and empathy. For a moment, the tension in the room eased. People began to see her not just as a boss, but as a leader with purpose. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. It was a news alert. Black CEO confronts her staff after being ejected from her own hotel. Full video released. She sighed softly and turned off the screen. Let the world talk, she said quietly. We'll show them what real change looks like. Then, as she walked toward the elevator, she stopped and looked back at her staff. You all have one choice today, she said. You can be part of the mistake and/or part of the transformation. With that, she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed slowly, reflecting her calm face. The face of a woman who had been publicly humiliated one day and risen stronger the next. Upstairs, alone again in her office, Danielle finally allowed herself a small, tired smile. The truth was out. The people who doubted her now knew exactly who she was. And more importantly, the world did too. But in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a bigger journey, one that would redefine not only her business but her legacy. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the Carter Grand Hotel. But the mood inside was different, tense, heavy, uncertain. The same lobby that once buzzed with polite greetings now echoed with silence. Every employee who remained walked on eggshells, afraid to make eye contact, afraid to speak Danielle Carter's name too loudly. Upstairs, in her corner office overlooking the city, Danielle sat at her desk with a cup of black coffee. She hadn't slept much again. The events of the last 2 days had turned her world upside down. Yet strangely, she felt more awake than ever. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Every major network wanted an interview. News anchors called her a symbol of dignity and power. Talk shows were debating her decision to fire her staff in 2 minutes. Some people praised her leadership. Others called her reaction harsh. But Danielle didn't care what the world thought. She wasn't fighting for public approval. She was fighting for something far more personal. The soul of her business. Clara, her assistant, entered the office with a tablet in hand. Ms. Carter, you might want to see this, she said quietly. Danielle looked up. What now? Clara placed the tablet on the desk and played a video. It was a clip from a national news broadcast, showing the footage of Danielle being thrown out, followed by her return and the firings. The anchor's voice narrated, in a shocking display of leadership, CEO Danielle Carter faced humiliation at her own luxury hotel but handled it with grace and authority. Within minutes, she turned the situation around, proving why she's one of the most respected businesswomen in America. Danielle watched in silence. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly. "Respect," she murmured. "It's strange how people notice it only after it's taken away." Clara nodded. "The story's everywhere. You're trending on every platform." And she hesitated. "There's a group of young entrepreneurs online calling you the 2-minute boss." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "The 2-minute boss?" "Yes," Clara said with a small smile. "They say you handled injustice in the shortest, most powerful way possible." Danielle chuckled softly, shaking her head. "The internet finds a name for everything." Then her expression grew serious again. "But this isn't about being a headline. We still have work to do." She stood up and walked toward the window, gazing down at the street below where people passed by, some even stopping to take pictures of the hotel's sign. "Clara," she said, "schedule a press conference for this evening. I'll speak publicly once. After that, no interviews." Clara nodded and left the room. By afternoon, the hotel lobby was filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and curious guests. The moment had arrived. Danielle walked down the grand staircase dressed in an elegant navy blue suit. Every eye turned toward her. She stepped up to the podium, her calm presence commanding attention. The microphones clicked on. "Good afternoon," she began. Her voice was steady, warm, but strong. "2 days ago, I was treated in a way no person should ever be treated, not because of who I am, but because of what people assumed I wasn't." The crowd grew quiet. I was judged by my appearance, disrespected by my own employees, and humiliated in front of strangers. But what hurt more than the embarrassment, she continued, was realizing that this could have happened to anyone, and it probably already has. She paused, letting that truth sink in. "I built this hotel to represent excellence, not ego. Hospitality, not hierarchy. And if we've forgotten that, then we've lost everything that matters. So yes, I made a decision, a hard one. I fired the staff involved, not because of anger, but because leadership requires accountability." A murmur rippled through the reporters. Cameras flashed like lightning. Danielle continued, her tone firm yet composed. "From today forward, the Carter Grand will introduce a new policy, one I'm calling the Human First Initiative. Every single employee, from interns to managers, will go through empathy and diversity training, not as a formality but as a foundation. No one will wear this uniform without understanding respect." Her words hit like waves. People nodded, clapped softly, some even teared up. "I don't believe in revenge," Danielle said, her voice softening. "I believe in change. What happened here won't define us. How we grow from it will." When she stepped down from the podium, the room erupted in applause. Not just polite clapping, genuine admiration. The story had started as a scandal, but now it had turned into a movement. As Danielle walked back to her office, Clara joined her, beaming. "You did it," she said. "You turned a disaster into something powerful." Danielle smiled faintly. "No," she said quietly. "We did it. Everyone who's watching, everyone who's learning, and that's what matters." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Danielle sat by her office window again. Outside, the city glowed with a golden hue, and for the first time in days, she felt peace. She opened her phone and scrolled through messages, not from journalists or CEOs, but from ordinary people. One read, "Thank you for standing up for all of us who've been judged unfairly." Another said, "You made me believe in leadership again." Danielle's eyes glistened. She put the phone down and whispered, "Maybe this was meant to happen." She looked out at her hotel one last time that night, the lights shining proudly once again, and smiled. The world had seen her downfall, but now they were witnessing her rise. And deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of a much greater legacy. The next few days felt like a storm, a strange kind of storm that didn't destroy, but awakened. Everywhere Danielle looked, her name was being spoken. TV anchors debated her decision. Social media flooded with hashtags. Celebrities, activists, and business leaders praised her courage. What began as a humiliating moment in a hotel lobby had now turned into a national story about strength, leadership, and justice. The internet called her the woman who fired disrespect. Some called her the silent storm. Others, simply as Danielle, as if she had become a symbol, not just a person. At first, Danielle didn't know how to feel. She hadn't done what she did for attention or fame. She had acted on instinct, the instinct to demand respect. not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been belittled or judged unfairly. On the morning of the third day, Danielle sat in her office scrolling through news updates. There were headlines everywhere. Black CEO redefines leadership after being thrown out of her own hotel. From humiliation to hero, Danielle Carter inspires millions. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She had always known that leadership came with pressure, but this was different. The world was watching her not as a businesswoman, but as a story of dignity, courage, and change. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she said. It was Clara again, carrying a folder and her usual calm smile. "You've got over 300 media requests," she said. "Morning shows, magazines, podcasts, everyone wants to talk to you." Danielle smiled faintly. "Let them talk to the story, not me." Clara tilted her head. "You don't want to speak publicly?" Danielle shook her head. "No, the world doesn't need another speech. They've already heard what they needed to. Respect is not negotiable." Clara nodded slowly, impressed as always by Danielle's quiet power. But then she opened the folder. "There's something else you should see. Look at these." Inside were printed letters, dozens of them, from people across the country. One was from a young hotel trainee who wrote, "Because of you, my manager apologized for the way he treats us. You gave me hope that fairness still exists." Another came from an older woman who said, "I've worked 30 years in customer service and never saw someone stand up like you did. Thank you for reminding us that kindness still matters." Danielle's eyes softened as she read. These weren't just messages, they were heart speaking back to her. She smiled gently. "Clara, these are better than any interview." Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the line of visitors grew longer each day. Some came to take pictures, others just to meet the woman whose story had touched them. Guests started booking rooms again, saying they wanted to stay where change began. Business was booming, but not because of luxury. It was because of respect. One evening, a mother and her teenage daughter checked in. When Danielle passed by, the woman stopped her. "Are you Ms. Carter?" Danielle smiled politely. "Yes, I am." The mother reached out, her voice soft. "My daughter saw your story online. She said, 'Oh, Mom, she looks like me when she owns a hotel.'" The girl blushed and waved shyly. Danielle knelt down, smiling warmly. "What's your name?" "Lena," the girl whispered. "Lena," Danielle said gently. "One day you're going to build something even bigger than this. Just remember, never let anyone tell you that you don't belong." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Moments like that reminded Danielle why she had started this journey. It was never just about buildings, rooms, or business. It was about belonging, about making people feel seen, heard, and valued. Later that night, Danielle stood by the hotel balcony, watching the city lights. Below, a group of employees walked out after their training session, laughing, chatting, treating guests with warmth. It made her heart swell. This was the new culture she had dreamed of, not built on fear, but on understanding. Clara joined her quietly. "You know," she said softly, "what happened to you might have been a blessing in disguise." Danielle looked at her, smiling faintly. "I was thinking the same thing. Sometimes life has to break your pride to rebuild your purpose." They stood there for a while, watching the night come alive. The pain of those first moments, the humiliation, the anger, the disbelief, had turned into something powerful, a movement for change. The Carter Grand was no longer just a hotel. It had become a symbol of fairness, of courage, of transformation. And though the world saw a headline, Danielle saw something deeper, a mirror of society itself. A reminder that everyone, no matter their background, deserves to be treated with human decency. Before heading back to her office, she whispered softly to herself, "Sometimes you have to lose control to take real control." She smiled, not the smile of victory, but of peace, the kind that comes only after surviving a storm and standing taller than before. Weeks passed and the chaos slowly faded into calm. The news stories moved on to other topics, but Danielle Carter's name remained, not as a scandal, but as a symbol. Across the country, people still talked about the black CEO who was thrown out of her own hotel and changed everything. Inside the Carter Grand Hotel, everything looked the same. The golden chandeliers still glimmered. The fountain still danced, but the energy was completely different. The cold professionalism had been replaced by warmth. The staff greeted guests with genuine smiles, not forced ones. Even the walls seemed to breathe differently, as if the building itself had learned compassion. Danielle stood in the center of the lobby one morning, quietly observing. She watched the new receptionist, a young man named Isaiah, helping an elderly guest with her luggage, offering her a seat and speaking kindly. The woman smiled, calling him a gentleman. That was all Danielle needed to see. She smiled softly. Change wasn't just written in policies now. It was living in every corner of her hotel. Later that afternoon, Danielle gathered her new team in the conference room. There were about 30 of them, young, diverse, excited. None of them had been there the day she was thrown out. These were new faces, new hearts, ready to start a new chapter. She stood at the front of the room and said quietly, "I want to tell you a story." Everyone leaned forward. Curious. "A few weeks ago," Danielle began, "I walked into this very hotel. I wasn't dressed like a CEO. I didn't look powerful or important. And because of that, I was judged. I was thrown out by people who worked for me. In front of guests. In front of cameras." Gasps filled the room. Some of the new staff had heard the story, but hearing it from her directly was different. Raw. Real. She continued. "It hurt. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I realized how easily people forget what respect means. So I made a choice. I fired them. But I didn't do it to make headlines. I did it to start over. To rebuild this place with people who understand that kindness is not optional." The room was silent. Every eye was fixed on her. Danielle looked around at her new team. Every face different, every person unique. "You are not just employees," she said softly. "You're the heart of this hotel. Every guest who walks through those doors will remember how you made them feel. That's your real job. The rest is just details." A young woman in the back raised her hand. "Ms. Carter, how did you keep calm that day, when they threw you out?" Danielle smiled gently. "Because anger doesn't change people," she said. "Example does. If I had shouted or cursed, I would have become the story, not the lesson." Her words sank deep. After the meeting, Danielle stayed behind alone, staring at the portraits on the wall. Photos of the hotel's early days. Her first ribbon cutting, her first staff. She touched one frame and whispered, "We're finally what I dreamed of." Outside, as the sun began to set, the lobby filled with guests again. Among them was a familiar face, the older woman who had once defended Danielle during the incident. She approached with a warm smile. "You kept your promise," she said. Danielle smiled back. "I had to. Some lessons are too important to ignore." The woman nodded. "You turned pain into purpose." "That's rare." Danielle thanked her, and as the woman left, she looked around one last time. Everything that had gone wrong had somehow led to something greater. The humiliation had become transformation. That night, Danielle sat in her office, the same spot where she once felt broken, and wrote a letter to herself. It wasn't for the press or for the world. It was for the woman who stood up when it would have been easier to walk away. She wrote, "Dear Danielle, sometimes you will be misunderstood. Sometimes people will mistake your silence for weakness and your kindness for softness. But remember, storms don't destroy queens. They reveal them. What happened to you wasn't a setback. It was a reset. Keep leading with grace, even when the world is watching with judgment. Because real power isn't in control, it's in compassion." She folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, smiling through quiet tears. Outside her window, the city lights shimmered like stars. The Carter Grand sign glowed proudly again, brighter than ever. The same place where she had once been humiliated was now the symbol of her greatest victory. Not because she won against anyone, but because she rose above everyone's expectations. Before leaving her office for the night, Danielle took one last look around. Her hotel was alive again, not with fear, but with heart. She whispered softly, "Redemption isn't about going back. It's about becoming something new." And with that, she walked out of her office, her heels echoing through the marble floors. Not the sound of power, but of peace. The same woman who had once been thrown out of her own empire now walked through it freely, proudly, and unapologetically. as a reminder to the world that no humiliation lasts forever, and no truth stays buried. Because when you lead with grace, the world eventually stands to applaud.